The biting, relentless wind whipped an unceasing barrage of snowflakes into Captain John, Cap Miller's weathered face, stinging his eyes, each tiny icy crystal a fresh, sharp insult to his already profoundly frayed dignity. He gripped the oversized, garishly yellow plastic handle of the snow shovel with gnarled, arthritic fingers, the penetrating cold seeping through his thin, inadequate gloves, a cruel and deliberate mockery of the warmth his 78-year-old body so desperately craved. From the confines of his heavy-duty all-terrain wheelchair, the task of clearing the walkway was not just monumentally difficult, it was a grotesque, humiliating pantomime of utter futility, the heavy, wet, cement-like snow, an insurmountable mocking barrier. Each awkward, poorly leveraged thrust of the shovel sent jolts of excruciating pain radiating through his shoulders and lower back, ghosts of old, half-forgotten injuries earned in the humid jungles of Southeast Asia and the dusty, unforgiving plains of some forgotten conflict, now cruelly reawakened and amplified by this absurd, degrading, and utterly unnecessary demand. Put your back into it, Miller, or what's left of it. The voice was sharp, high-pitched, and edged with a smug, unwavering, almost gleeful authority that grated on Cap's nerves more profoundly than the biting cold or the throbbing pain. Those hefty HOA dues don't pay for themselves, you know. Everyone in Oakhaven Meadows has to contribute to the upkeep and beauty of our community. There are no free rides here, Captain. Not even for, well, you know, those who believe the rules don't apply to them. Cap didn't look up. He didn't need to. He could feel her presence, her oppressive aura. He didn't need to see Ms. Evelyn Croft, the self-appointed iron-fisted president of the Oakhaven Meadows Homeowners Association, to vividly picture her standing there, arms crossed tightly over her expensive, insulated parka, a self-satisfied, condescending smirk plastered on her thin-lipped face. He could feel her gaze on him, a palpable weight of disdain and petty triumph. But it wasn't just her domineering presence or her cutting words that held him captive in this frozen, degrading tableau. It was the object she held loosely, almost casually, in her gloved right hand, its dark parkerized metallic gleam, a sinister, incongruous counterpoint to the pristine, innocent white of the freshly fallen snow. A gun. Small, compact, semi-automatic in appearance, but undeniably, unmistakably a gun, pointed not directly at him, not yet, but in his general direction, a silent, unambiguous, and utterly terrifying threat. He was a veteran, a retired captain from the United States Army, a man who had faced down enemy fire in multiple theaters of war without flinching, a man who had led platoons of brave young soldiers into situations far more perilous, far more genuinely life-threatening than this snow-choked suburban driveway. But this was different. This wasn't the chaos of war, the grim necessity of combat. This was a petty, vindictive tyrant, armed with a weapon callously exploiting his age, his documented service-connected disability, his inherent vulnerability, all under the grotesquely twisted guise of community responsibility and upholding standards. The sheer galling absurdity of it was a bitter, acrid pill he was being forced to swallow. He was 78 years old, reliant on a specialized wheelchair for all mobility, after a severe spinal injury sustained during his final tour, an injury that had progressively worsened over the decades, finally irrevocably caught up with him 2 years prior, confining him permanently. Shoveling heavy wet snow was not just beyond his physical capability, it was a dangerous, potentially life-altering charade. I can't, Ms. Croft. He managed to rasp out his voice, thin and reedy, the words almost snatched away by the howling wind before they could reach her. My doctor, I have a letter on file with the HOA. I'm not supposed to engage in strenuous physical activity, especially not this. Excuses, Miller. Always excuses with you people. Croft scoffed, her voice dripping with contempt. She took a small, deliberate step, closer the crunch of her insulated boots, on the snow, unnervingly loud in the otherwise muffled landscape. A little fresh air and honest hard work never hurt anyone. Builds character. Besides, it's about the optics, Miller. The perception. People in the community see you sitting around all day warm and cozy in that house. Your daughter pays for not lifting a finger. It's high time you showed a little gratitude, a little initiative. Earned your keep, so to speak. This walkway here, she gestured with the hand, holding the gun towards a small, insignificant stretch of concrete leading from the community mailboxes to the main sidewalk, is HOA common property. It needs clearing, and you're going to clear it. Now. The walkway in question was indeed technically HOA responsibility, but it was a secondary path rarely used in heavy snow until the association's contracted and notoriously unreliable plow service, eventually often hours or even a day late, got around to it. Croft, it was chillingly apparent, had decided that today was the day for a very personal, very public demonstration of her absolute authority, and Cap, in his vulnerable state, was her chosen unwilling participant, her object lesson. He heard the distinct sound of a car slowing down on the snow-packed street, the crunch and squeak of tires on the compacted surface. A familiar engine sound, a familiar car, Sarah's car, his daughter. A wave of profound burning shame washed over him so potent it almost buckled him quickly, followed by a surge of raw, desperate fear. Not for himself, not anymore, but for Sarah. He didn't want her walking into this confronting, this clearly unhinged armed woman. Sarah was tough, she was capable, but this was insane. Sarah Chen Miller, special agent with the Department of Homeland Security Investigations Division, felt the familiar knot of professional unease tighten in her stomach the moment she turned onto their quiet, residential street. The heavy snowfall overnight had transformed their usually unremarkable suburban neighborhood into a deceptively picturesque winter wonderland. But the scene that greeted her as she approached their modest single-story house was anything but picturesque. It was a tableau of pure, unadulterated malice. Her father Cap, his normally proud erect military posture, reduced to a defeated slump in his heavy-duty wheelchair, was out in the freezing wind-whipped cold, a snow shovel lying uselessly, almost accusingly beside him. And standing over him, practically looming, gesticulating angrily with something dark and menacing in her hand, was Evelyn Croft. Sarah's years of intensive training, her ingrained threat assessment protocols, kicked in instantly, overriding the initial visceral surge of filial fear and white-hot outrage that threatened to consume her. Threat assessment parameters: victim, elderly male 78, known severe mobility impairment, wheelchair-bound, displaying signs of distress and potential hypothermia. Aggressor, adult female mid-50s, visibly agitated, possibly emotionally unstable, holding a potential firearm. Environmental conditions: severe winter weather, sub-freezing temperatures, high winds, snow impeding movement and visibility. Potential for rapid deterioration of victim's condition. She brought her unmarked government-issued sedan to an abrupt, controlled halt in the middle of the street engine, still running headlights cutting through the falling snow, effectively blocking any easy egress for Croft. She didn't immediately reach for her own service weapon, holstered securely but accessibly beneath her winter coat. De-escalation, if feasible, was always the preferred first option, especially with an unknown, potentially unstable variable like Evelyn Croft's current mental state. But her hand instinctively, almost unconsciously, knew precisely where her Sig Sauer P229 was, every nerve ending in her body thrumming with a heightened state of readiness, her senses hyper-alert. Ms. Croft. Sarah's voice amplified by adrenaline, and a surge of protective fury cut through the frigid air like a whip crack. Sharp, authoritative, the parade ground command voice inherited from her father, now meticulously honed and weaponized by years of federal law enforcement service. What exactly is going on here? Step away from my father. Now Evelyn Croft spun around, startled by the sudden commanding voice, the object in her hand, momentarily forgotten her arm, dropping slightly. Cap looked up, his face etched with a complicated mixture of profound relief and palpable anxiety. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Sarah subtly shook her head, a silent command for him to remain quiet. Special Agent Chen Miller Croft said, her composure snapping back with surprising, almost alarming speed, though a fleeting flicker of surprise or perhaps annoyance at the interruption crossed her sharp features. She knew vaguely that Sarah worked for the government, a nebulous concept that likely held little real meaning in Croft's self-absorbed petty worldview. The full import of her actual title, Special Agent Department of Homeland Security, and the authority it carried probably hadn't registered. Just ensuring your father fulfills his community obligations. We've had some ongoing concerns about his lack of participation in maintaining Oak Haven Meadows standards. She gestured vaguely dismissively with the hand holding the object. Sarah's eyes narrowed, her focus intensifying. It was indeed a semi-automatic pistol, or a very convincing high-quality replica. At this distance in the swirling, obscuring snow, it was nearly impossible to be absolutely certain without a closer inspection. But in this context, replica or real, brandished in such a manner, it was a deadly threat. It was an instrument of terror. My father is a 78-year-old service-connected disabled veteran, Ms. Croft. Sarah stated, her voice dangerously calm, each word deliberately enunciated as she exited her car, leaving the driver's door ajar, a subtle signal of her readiness to re-engage or disengage as the situation dictated. She kept her hands visible away from her body, her movements slow, measured, and non-threatening, even as every fiber of her being screamed for more direct, decisive action. He is physically incapable of shoveling heavy snow, a fact that is well documented with the HOA, and you are fully aware of it. What precisely is that in your hand? Croft looked down at the object in her hand, as if genuinely surprised to find it there, a ludicrously unconvincing display of innocence. Oh, this old thing. She gave a dismissive, brittle little laugh that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. Just a little visual aid, a bit of persuasion, if you will. It's an airsoft pistol, for heaven's sake. A toy. To make sure he understood the seriousness of his obligations. Some people, especially those of a certain generation, only respond to a firm hand, a clear show of authority, you know. She even wiggled it slightly, a grotesque, malicious glint of amusement in her eyes. Airsoft. A tiny, almost imperceptible fraction of the immense tension in Sarah's shoulders eased, but it was immediately, overwhelmingly replaced by a cold, focused, methodical anger. An airsoft gun, even a toy, when brandished in a threatening, intimidating manner, especially towards a vulnerable, elderly, disabled individual, was still assault. It was still felonious menacing. It was still a deliberate act of terror. And to perpetrate this against her father, a man who had sacrificed his health, his youth, his comrades, for the very freedoms this woman so casually abused. Put it down, Ms. Croft. Sarah ordered, her voice dropping an octave, losing all pretense of civility, resonating with the unmistakable steel of federal authority. On the ground, slowly, now. The setup for this horrifying confrontation had been months, perhaps even a full year in the making, a slow, insidious escalation of targeted harassment and petty tyranny. Sarah and Cap had moved into Oakhaven Meadows just over a year ago. After Cap's health had taken a significant, irreversible downturn, making it impossible for him to continue living alone in his multi-story townhouse, Sarah had specifically sought out and purchased this modest single-story, accessible property in what was marketed as a quiet, well-maintained, retiree-friendly community. Cap, fiercely independent and proud to a fault, had initially chafed at the idea of living with his daughter, of being, as he saw it, a burden. But they had, over time, settled into a comfortable, mutually supportive routine. He had his meticulously organized library of military history books, his endless documentaries, his surprisingly competitive online chess games with old comrades scattered across the globe. Sarah had her demanding, often emotionally draining job, but she cherished their quiet evenings together, his gruff, undemonstrative affection, a much-needed balm to her often stressful days. Evelyn Croft, however, had been a persistent, irritating thorn in their side from almost the very first day. The inciting incident, the first clear salvo in her campaign of harassment, had been over Cap's small, respectfully maintained collection of military service flags, the Stars and Stripes, the Army flag, the POW MIA flag, which he liked to display on a small flagpole on their porch on national holidays and significant military anniversaries. Croft had personally, almost gleefully, delivered a formal HOA violation notice, citing an obscure, selectively enforced bylaw about excessive or non-approved external decorations and displays of a partisan or potentially controversial nature. The letter itself was condescending its tone, implying that Cap's quiet display of patriotism was somehow a neighborhood nuisance, an affront to community aesthetics. Sarah, a seasoned investigator adept at dissecting bureaucratic nonsense, had challenged the violation, meticulously documenting numerous other houses in Oakhaven Meadows, with far more ostentatious year-round decorative displays that went completely unremarked by the HOA. Croft had been forced to rescind the violation, but with extremely ill grace, muttering audibly about some people thinking they're above the rules just because of their past. The first truly shocking event, a significant escalation of Croft's targeted harassment, had occurred approximately 4 months later. The HOA, under Croft's direct leadership, had suddenly, with minimal prior notification, announced a critical emergency special assessment for urgent and unforeseen repairs to the community's primary retaining wall. The fee levied per household was substantial, nearly $1,000. Cap, living on his fixed veterans disability pension and Social Security, found the unexpected expense a significant financial burden. When Sarah, exercising her due diligence, had questioned the legitimacy and exorbitant cost of these alleged repairs at a sparsely attended HOA meeting, presenting her own independent research from county records and engineering reports that strongly suggested the retaining wall was structurally sound and that the quotes obtained by the HOA were grossly inflated, possibly from a contractor with close ties to Croft's husband, Croft had publicly viciously berated her. If your father can't afford to live in a community with certain financial standards, Special Agent Chen Miller Croft had sneered, her voice dripping with disdain, deliberately using Sarah's professional title in a mocking way in front of at least 20 other residents. Then perhaps Oakhaven Meadows simply isn't the appropriate place for him. Perhaps a state-run facility would be more suitable. The public humiliation, the thinly veiled threat of displacement, had stung Cap deeply, a wound to his pride, far more painful than any financial levy. Sarah had seen the quiet, painful retreat in his eyes that night, a dimming of his spirit that enraged her. The second shocking event, and a direct, undeniable precursor to today's terrifying confrontation, had involved the ongoing contentious issue of the snow removal contract itself. Oakhaven Meadows had a notoriously unreliable, often negligent contractor responsible for clearing community roads and walkways. After one particularly bad blizzard the previous winter, where Cap was effectively snowbound for 3 full days, unable to even get his wheelchair down the treacherously unshoveled driveway for a critical, non-reschedulable vascular specialist appointment at the VA hospital, Sarah had formally and angrily complained to the HOA board. She had then taken matters into her own hands, hiring a private bonded and insured snow removal service to clear their property and a safe path to the street. Croft had responded with almost unbelievable vindictiveness, issuing yet another violation notice, this time for employing unauthorized, non-HOA-approved contractors on common property, the small strip of sidewalk and the driveway apron technically being designated as HOA common ground, and had then, in an act of pure unadulterated spite, tacked on an additional hefty fine because Sarah's private plow service had, in Croft's arbitrary and entirely baseless opinion, piled snow incorrectly and dangerously on adjacent common ground. It was abundantly painfully clear that Evelyn Croft was systematically, maliciously using the HOA rules and regulations not as tools for community governance, but as weapons, specifically targeting Cap's known vulnerabilities and Sarah's increasingly desperate attempts to mitigate them. She seemed personally, almost pathologically incensed that they weren't suffering enough or weren't sufficiently deferential and cowed by her authority. Now faced with Sarah's unyielding, ice-cold command, Evelyn Croft's carefully constructed bravado visibly wavered. The airsoft pistol moments before a symbol of her power and control suddenly seemed to shrink in her hand, morphing into a damning piece of evidence. She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously from Sarah's stony face to Cap, who was now slowly, painfully maneuvering his wheelchair towards the house, then back to Sarah. "It's just an airsoft, I told you." She repeated, a distinct, unattractive whine, creeping into her voice, replacing the earlier arrogance. "A toy. A replica." "Don't be so dramatic, Agent Chen Miller. It's not like it's even loaded. A toy that looks remarkably like a real firearm, Ms." Croft Sarah retorted, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "A toy that you were using to threaten, intimidate, and coerce a disabled elderly man in freezing weather. Put it down." Sarah took another deliberate, measured step forward, her presence, her sheer intensity seeming to suck the air out of the space between them. Reluctantly, with a theatrical put-upon sigh designed to convey her supposed exasperation with Sarah's overreaction, Evelyn Croft bent down and awkwardly placed the airsoft pistol on the snow-covered ground near her feet. "Dad, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her eyes never leaving Croft, her senses still on high alert, but her voice softening perceptibly as she addressed Cap, who had finally reached the shelter of the porch. Cap nodded, his face pale and drawn, but his jaw set in a familiar stubborn line. "I'm cold, Sarah, bone-chillingly cold. But I'm all right, just monumentally angry and ashamed." "There's nothing for you to be ashamed of," Dad Sarah said fiercely. "Go inside, unlock the door, get warm, I'll handle this." Cap, after a last lingering look of utter contempt at Evelyn Croft, nodded slowly and with considerable difficulty maneuvered his wheelchair through the doorway Sarah now held open. Once Cap was safely inside the door, securely closed behind him, Sarah's entire demeanor shifted, hardened. The concerned protective daughter receded, and the formidable, experienced federal law enforcement officer took complete, unequivocal control. "Ms. Croft," she began, her voice like polished steel, each word a carefully aimed projectile. "You are, I believe, operating under several critical and for you potentially catastrophic misapprehensions. First, brandishing any object, real or replica, that can be reasonably perceived by a victim as a firearm in a threatening manner constitutes assault, often aggravated assault depending on jurisdiction and victim vulnerability. Second, forcing a disabled individual against their will and known physical capacity to perform physical labor under threat or duress constitutes coercion, endangerment, and potentially unlawful imprisonment. Third, and perhaps most significantly for your immediate future, my father, Captain John Miller, is a federally protected veteran with documented service-connected disabilities. Intimidating, threatening, harassing, or assaulting such a veteran, particularly when it interferes with their ability to live peacefully, access their rights, or receive necessary care, carries severe penalties, often escalating to the federal level, especially when an instrumentality of fear like your toy gun is involved." Evelyn Croft's face, already pale, seemed to drain of all remaining color, leaving it a ghastly, sickly white against the backdrop of the swirling snow. "Federally protected veteran," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. What exactly does that mean for me?" She knew Sarah worked for Homeland Security. It was common, if vaguely understood, neighborhood knowledge. She'd even, in a twisted way, tried to use it to subtly intimidate Sarah in the past, implying that Sarah should be more understanding of the need for order and security in the community. But she had clearly catastrophically underestimated the true scope of Sarah's authority, her knowledge, and the specific legal protections afforded to men like Cap. She likely assumed Sarah's job was some dull, bureaucratic desk assignment, far removed from the realities of actual law enforcement. This was the midpoint twist, the revelation that Croft had stumbled into a legal minefield she hadn't even known existed. It wasn't just about an HOA dispute anymore. Sarah's specific professional capacity, combined with Cap's federally protected status, elevated the stakes exponentially. Croft had likely seen Sarah as just an annoying, overly litigious, overprotective daughter with a vaguely impressive, but ultimately irrelevant government job title. Now she was faced with a highly trained, deeply informed special agent from the Department of Homeland Security, who not only understood the intricacies of both local and federal law, but also possessed the authority and the unwavering determination to see it rigorously enforced, especially given the intensely personal nature of the offense. The airsoft gun, while not a true firearm, had been the clear instrument of that armed intimidation, and its very similitude was legally critical. Sarah knew that the perception of the threat by the victim was paramount, particularly when leveraged against a demonstrably vulnerable individual like Cap. Before Croft could formulate a response, Sarah's phone was out. She wasn't dialing 911. She had a better idea. "Mr. Henderson, please." A brief pause. "Arthur, it's Sarah Chen Miller. I'm so sorry to bother you at home on a Saturday, but I have an active situation here at Oakhaven Meadows involving my father, Captain Miller. There's been an assault involving what appears to be an airsoft pistol used as a weapon by the HOA president, Evelyn Croft." Yes, that Evelyn Croft. Arthur Henderson was a neighbor, a retired lawyer who lived 2 streets over a quiet man who mostly kept to himself, but was known for his sharp legal mind and his quiet disdain for Croft's antics. He also had a state-of-the-art security system with multiple external cameras covering his property, one of which, Sarah happened to know from a previous casual conversation about neighborhood security, had a clear, unobstructed, zoomable view of the community mailboxes and the very walkway where Cap had been accosted. "Arthur, I know this is a long shot." Sarah continued, her voice calm but urgent. But is there any chance at all, that your front-facing security camera might have captured any portion of the interaction at the mailboxes in, say, the last 30 to 45 minutes? There was a longer pause. Sarah held her breath. Croft was watching her now, a new dawning horror in her eyes. You're in luck. Sarah Henderson's voice came back, crackling slightly. I was just reviewing some footage because I thought I saw a plow go by earlier than usual. My camera on the northeast corner definitely caught something. Looks like Ms. Croft and your father. And yes, she's gesticulating rather animatedly with something in her hand. The resolution is excellent. I'm saving the segment right now. Do the police need a copy? Relief potent and immediate washed over Sarah. Arthur, you are a lifesaver. Yes, they will, and so will I. She ended the call. This was the real twist. The unexpected corroborating evidence from an unassuming secondary source completely unknown to Croft. Croft, in her arrogance, might have dismissed Sarah's threats about legal repercussions, might have even believed she could spin the narrative claim Cap was confused or that Sarah was biased. But irrefutable high-definition video footage captured by a neutral third party that was a game-changer. That was concrete. That was undeniable. Sarah then calmly dialed 911. Her voice crisp and professional as she reported an assault in progress, the use of a weapon, clarifying it was now believed to be airsoft, but was used to threaten a vulnerable adult, the victim's status as an elderly disabled veteran, and requested immediate local police presence. She provided their precise location and a description of Croft. Then she looked at Evelyn Croft, whose face had gone from sickly white to a shade of pale green. We are going to wait here for the local police, Ms. Croft. Sarah stated, her voice devoid of inflection. You are not to move from that spot. You are, for all intents and purposes, being detained pending their arrival. Do you understand me clearly? Croft, looking thoroughly deflated. Her arrogance completely shattered her eyes, darting wildly as if seeking an escape route that didn't exist, nodded numbly, a small choked sound escaping her lips. While they waited, in the biting wind and swirling snow, a tense, frozen silence hanging between them, Sarah, with meticulous care, retrieved an evidence bag from the emergency kit she always kept in the trunk of her car. Using a clean handkerchief from her pocket to avoid smudging any potential fingerprints, unlikely on the textured plastic grip, but procedure was procedure, she carefully picked up the airsoft pistol. She expertly cleared its chamber. It was, as Croft had claimed, unloaded, and there was no magazine inserted, but she treated it with the caution due any firearm and secured it in the evidence bag, noting the make and model if visible. She also took several photographs of the scene with her work phone. The shovel lying abandoned in the snow, the partially cleared, or rather haphazardly disturbed patch of walkway, Croft's distinct boot prints leading up to where Cap had been the discarded airsoft pistol before she bagged it. Every detail mattered. Local police officers, a young stern-faced Officer Miller, no relation to Sarah, a fact quickly established, and an older, more seasoned Officer Davies, arrived within an impressively short 7 minutes, their patrol car lights flashing, cutting through the increasingly heavy snowfall. Their expressions were grim as Sarah quickly, concisely, and professionally briefed them, presenting her federal credentials to establish her bona fides. She laid out the sequence of events, highlighting Cap's status as a disabled veteran, Croft's escalating pattern of harassment, and her deliberate armed intimidation that morning. She forced him from his wheelchair, effectively making him believe he had no choice but to attempt to shovel heavy snow under direct threat from this, Sarah said, holding up the bagged airsoft gun, the plastic crinkling in the cold. She explicitly stated he needed to earn his dues and that this was his community contribution. My father is 78 and has severe mobility limitations documented with the HOA. Officer Davies, a man with a neatly trimmed military-style haircut and an observant gaze, looked from the bagged airsoft gun to where Cap had been struggling in the snow, then fixed his eyes on Evelyn Croft, his disgust palpable and unconcealed. "That's beyond despicable, ma'am," he said, his voice tight with contempt, addressing Croft directly. Using a weapon, even a fake one, to threaten an elderly disabled man like that. In this weather, the climax unfolded not in the sterile confines of an HOA meeting room or a courtroom, but right there on the snow-swept, wind-battered suburban street, under the increasingly curious and concerned eyes of several neighbors who had begun to peek out from behind their curtains, drawn by the flashing police lights and the unusual commotion. Evelyn Croft, now facing two uniformed local police officers and a formidable Homeland Security special agent, made a desperate last-ditch attempt to reassert her shattered authority to regain some semblance of control. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding," she exclaimed, her voice rising in pitch, bordering on hysterical. "I am the Homeowners Association president. I am a respected member of this community, Mr. Miller has been consistently delinquent in his community contributions and has shown a distinct lack of respect for our rules. I was merely encouraging him firmly but fairly to participate. He's more capable than he lets on. Encouraging him with a weapon that strongly resembles a deadly firearm, Miss Croft." Sarah interjected coldly, her voice cutting through Croft's tirade. "Forcing a 78-year-old disabled man, your own neighbor, into a potentially life-threatening situation in sub-freezing weather conditions by threatening him, that's not encouragement, Ms. Croft. That is, by legal definition, assault with a menacing weapon and reckless endangerment of a vulnerable adult. And given my father's documented medical conditions, it could very well have triggered a serious medical event." Sarah then turned to Officer Miller, the younger of the two local cops. "Officer, given Captain Miller's status as a federally protected veteran and the clear nature of the armed intimidation he was subjected to, there are almost certainly federal implications here that will need to be explored. I will be filing a comprehensive report through my own agency channels and will liaise with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the VA Office of Inspector General. However, for the immediate situation, the local charges of assault with a menacing weapon, as even a highly realistic replica weapon used to threaten and cause fear of imminent harm can be so considered, and reckless endangerment of an elderly and disabled person are abundantly clear and fully supported by the evidence, including forthcoming video." Officer Miller, who had been listening intently, his expression hardening with each word, Sarah spoke, nodded decisively. "Ms. Croft," he said, his voice firm and unwavering, based on the compelling physical evidence, presented the credible witness testimony of Special Agent Chen Miller and the anticipated corroborating video evidence. "You are under arrest for felony assault with a menacing weapon and felony reckless endangerment." Evelyn Croft's face crumpled completely. The fight seemed to drain out of her in an instant. "Arrest," she whispered, her voice cracking. You can't arrest me. I donate to the policeman's ball. My husband, he plays golf with the chief. I am a pillar of this community." Her protests devolved into incoherent, desperate sputtering, a pathetic shadow of her former arrogance. "Ma'am, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Officer Davies said, his voice devoid of sympathy as he stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in his grasp. The sight of Evelyn Croft, the self-proclaimed undisputed queen of Oakhaven Meadows, the architect of so much petty misery, being firmly handcuffed and read her Miranda rights, her protests now reduced to whimpering denials, and pleas, was a moment of stark, undeniable, and profoundly public justice. Her reign, built on a foundation of bullying, intimidation, and the abuse of minor power, had ended not with a whimper, but with the decisive metallic click of steel bracelets in the swirling, unforgiving snow. The falling action began almost immediately, as Croft, now sobbing uncontrollably, was carefully but firmly placed in the back of a heated police cruiser. Neighbors, emboldened by the police presence and Croft's dramatic downfall, began to emerge from their homes, their expressions a mixture of shock, disbelief, and in some cases, barely concealed almost triumphant relief. Sarah, after providing the officers with her contact information and a brief summary of Arthur Henderson's potential video evidence, finally allowed some of the tension to drain from her shoulders and went inside to check on her father. Cap was sitting by the crackling gas fireplace, a thick woolen blanket wrapped around his shoulders, a steaming mug of tea cradled in his trembling hands. His face was still pale, but his eyes, when they met, Sarah's, were bright, with a complex mixture of emotions, residual anger, profound relief, and an undeniable, overwhelming pride in his daughter. "You always did know how to handle bullies, Sarah girl," he said, his voice a little shaky but firm. "Ever since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Never backed down from a fight if it was a righteous one." Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair, taking one of his cold hands in hers. "No one gets to treat you like that." "Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion. No one. Not while I'm around. In the days and weeks that followed, the Oakhaven Meadows Homeowners Association was thrown into complete and utter turmoil. The interim board members, most of whom had been Croft's cowed compliant subordinates, were now faced with a full-blown, highly public scandal. News of the HOA president's arrest for allegedly threatening an elderly disabled war veteran at gunpoint, the airsoft detail often minimized or sensationalized in initial local news reports, and social media gossip spread like wildfire through the community and beyond. Several local veterans organizations got wind of the story, offering vocal and practical support to Captain Miller and issuing strong public condemnations of Croft's alleged actions. Arthur Henderson provided his crystal-clear video footage to the police, which unequivocally corroborated Sarah's account and depicted Croft's aggressive demeanor and the brandishing of the weapon-like object in chilling detail. Sarah, true to her word, filed a detailed, comprehensive report with her superiors at the Department of Homeland Security, meticulously outlining the incident as a clear case of targeted harassment, intimidation, and assault of a disabled federal veteran. While direct federal criminal charges for such an isolated incident were complex to pursue without evidence of a broader conspiracy or a specific intent to interfere with federally protected rights in a way that met the high prosecutorial thresholds, her official report added significant weight and credibility to the local prosecution's case. It also ensured that Evelyn Croft's actions were formally documented at a federal level, potentially impacting any future security clearances or positions of trust she might ever seek. The local district attorney, however, a no-nonsense prosecutor with a strong record on elder abuse cases, took the case very seriously, especially given Cap's undeniable vulnerability, Croft's clear abuse of her position of authority, and the powerful impact of the video evidence. The resolution was multifaceted, legally sound, and for Cap and Sarah deeply satisfying, though the process was emotionally draining. Evelyn Croft, facing overwhelming and irrefutable evidence, including the damning video footage, Sarah's credible testimony, Cap's poignant victim impact statement, and corroborating statements from other Oakhaven residents who finally felt safe enough to come forward with their own stories of Croft's bullying, was advised by her increasingly beleaguered lawyer that a trial would be a public relations disaster and would almost certainly result in a conviction on more serious charges. She eventually pled guilty to felony menacing with a deadly weapon, the state law allowing for realistic replicas to be considered as such under specific circumstances of threat and misdemeanor, reckless endangerment of a vulnerable adult. Her sentence included a significant period of court-supervised probation, 3 years, a mandatory 6-month term of home confinement with electronic monitoring, just short of actual jail time, but a severe restriction of liberty for someone like Croft, completion of an intensive anger management and ethical conduct program, substantial fines and restitution, part of which was directed to a local veterans support organization chosen by Cap, and crucially, a court order permanently barring her from ever again serving on any HOA board, community association, or any similar position of authority or public trust. She was also required to issue a formal, written public apology to Captain Miller, which was published per the court's order in the local newspaper and the Oakhaven Meadows community newsletter. Her large, ostentatious house in Oakhaven Meadows, once her castle and symbol of her dominance, went on the market shortly thereafter, sold at a loss in a hushed, expedited sale. The public shame and the stripping of her perceived power were for someone of Evelyn Croft's ego, a punishment perhaps more profound than incarceration. The Oakhaven Meadows HOA itself underwent a radical and much-needed transformation. New board members were elected in a special election, individuals genuinely committed to the well-being and fair governance of the community, not to their own aggrandizement or petty power trips. They immediately initiated a comprehensive overhaul of the HOA bylaws, systematically identifying and removing many of Croft's most punitive, arbitrary, and discriminatory rules. They also instituted a new volunteer-driven Neighbor Helping Neighbor program specifically designed to assist elderly, disabled, and temporarily incapacitated residents with essential tasks like snow removal, minor yard work, and grocery runs, funded transparently through regular dues and community fundraising, not through punitive, unexpected special assessments. Captain John "Cap" Miller became something of an unlikely local hero, a symbol of quiet dignity and resilience in the face of egregious abuse. His quiet strength, combined with Sarah's decisive professional action, inspired many in Oakhaven and beyond. He was initially hesitant, but eventually agreed to speak at a local Veterans Day event, not about his ordeal, but about the enduring importance of respecting, supporting, and advocating for those who had served and sacrificed for their country, and the need for vigilance against the abuse of power in any form, however petty. His ordeal, far from diminishing his spirit, seemed to have reawakened a dormant fire within him. He, even with Sarah's help, started a small support group for disabled veterans within their wider community, focusing on advocacy and mutual aid. The process was therapeutic, helping him process the humiliation and anger he had endured. Sarah, though she steadfastly preferred to remain out of the public spotlight, found a new, deeper level of respect and quiet admiration within her community. Her actions had not only protected her beloved father, but had effectively liberated Oakhaven Meadows from the clutches of a petty tyrant. She continued her vital, demanding work at Homeland Security, but the fierce, unwavering protective love she had demonstrated for her father resonated deeply with all who knew their story. The heavy snows of that bitter winter eventually melted, and spring, vibrant and full of promise, came to Oakhaven Meadows. The memory of that ugly, freezing day remained a scar on their collective consciousness, but it was now overlaid with the hard-won knowledge that justice, though sometimes frustratingly slow and arduous, could with courage and perseverance be decisively and satisfyingly delivered. Captain Miller's service flags flew proudly and frequently on his porch once more, no longer symbols of contention or targets for harassment, but of resilience, honor, and respect in a community that was finally slowly learning the true, compassionate meaning of the word. The biting wind had passed, replaced by a gentler breeze.